Hello and welcome to another episode of the Bold Conversations with Joyce podcast. This is a space where we confront real issues, we elevate real voices, and spark real change. I am your host, Joyce Arthur, and today we are diving into a topic that is very heavy, it is emotional, and very urgent. A topic that affects millions of children across the world, yet it remains deeply buried in silence and stigma. Today we are talking about pedophilia and child sexual abuse. Now, every week, news headlines and social media platforms reveal very heartbreaking cases of children whose innocence and futures are violently taken away by adults who are trusted to protect them. And here, adults, I am referring to teachers, religious leaders, community figures, relatives, coaches. Now, these are not isolated cases. This is a crisis that is destroying lives, shattering families, and robbing children of their right to safety, to dignity, and a future. Before I go ahead to talk more about what these issues are, let's first of all understand who pedophilias are, or what is pedophilia, and sexual or child abuse. These two words, pedophilia and child abuse, are sometimes used interchangeably. So before we delve deeper, let's understand what they are. So what is pedophilia? Pedophilia, in clinical and psychological terms, it refers to a psychiatric disorder where an adult or older adolescent experiences intense and persistent sexual attraction to a pre-pubescent children, typically children under the age of 13. It is an attraction that is rooted in power imbalance and psychological distortion. So it does not come from a point of love or care. Rather, it is rooted in attraction, rooted in power imbalance and psychological disorder. Let me take that again. So what is pedophilia? Pedophilia, in clinical and psychological terms, refers to a psychological disorder or a psychiatric disorder where an adult or older adolescent experiences intense and persistent sexual attraction to pre-pubescent children, typically children under the age of 13. It is an attraction that is rooted in power imbalance and sexual distortion, not in love or care. Now, while this term pedophilia refers to the attraction, what we are truly concerned about today is the action. What happens when that attraction is acted upon? So that is what we mean by pedophilia. Let's go ahead to explain what child sexual abuse is. Now, child sexual abuse occurs when an adult engages a minor in any form of sexual activity or exploitation, whether through physical contact, grooming, exposure to sexual acts or pornography, coercion, threats, manipulation, or online exploitation. Sexual abuse includes rape, molestation, forced touching, sexualized conversations, and any act done for adult sexual gratification. Now, let's be absolutely clear on this. A child cannot give consent. Any sexual act involving a child is abuse. It is exploitation, violence, and violation of human rights. And the consequences are lifelong. Now, sexual abuse is not just a legal issue. It is a public health crisis, a psychological emergency, and a moral fight for the soul of our society. And today on the Bold Conversations podcast, we are breaking the silence because protecting children is not optional. It is a responsibility we all share. Now, some of us may not know how urgent sexual or child abuse is because we do not know what the statistics are. So let's put this crisis into a data perspective. According to UNICEF, more than 79 million girls and women in Sub-Saharan Africa were raped or sexually assaulted before the age of 18. That is 1 in 5. So when you take 5 Sub-Saharan girls or African women, 1 out of these 5 were sexually assaulted before the age of 18. Now, these numbers don't include boys, who are often silenced by culture and also stigma. Research across African countries also shows that child abuse prevalence among girls ranges from 2% to 68%, and among boys 4% to 60%, depending on the country and how data was collected. And experts also shows or have proven that these numbers are likely much higher because most of these cases are not reported. So when we say child abuse is a crisis, we mean crisis. It is a silent epidemic that is affecting rural and urban communities. It is affecting both the rich and the poor families and both boys and girls. Now let's talk about some real stories and examples that have been trending on social media for some time now. And I am going to share 2 heartbreaking stories. The first story is about a child called Ochenya. Now, Ochenya is a Nigerian. And stories shows that this child at the age of 13 years was sexually molested by both an uncle and the uncle's son. And this sexual abuse resulted in severe medical complications, and ultimately this child lost her life. Now her story became a symbol of how deeply children can suffer in silence and how slow systems are to respond to child abuse. Another case I would want to cite is from Ghana. A young boy called Ransford, who was a young footballer. Now this young boy, aged 16 years, was in a football academy in Ghana, and this child was allegedly sodomized by his coach, someone that he saw to be a mentor figure, who was a trusted adult, expected to shape his dream to be the best footballer in Africa and even in the world. Now, reports shows that this child suffered from a trauma, and in the long run, he lost his life. A life full of potential that has been interrupted by violence. All these are only the stories we hear. What about the thousands of those stories that has not been told yet? And what about the thousands of children out there whose voices has been buried, whose families are afraid to speak, or whose abusers are protected by status and power? Now let's proceed to talk about the consequences of child abuse. The consequences has a ripple effect. It affects both the child, the family, the community, and also the society. Now, this is how child abuse affects children. When a child is sexually abused, it brings physical harm to the child. Sometimes some of these children are injured. They can contract sexually transmitted infections and even unwanted pregnancy. Now, apart from this physical harm, there is also a psychological trauma that child abuse victims suffer. Research shows that majority of these children who goes through this abuse has anxiety, depression. They have PTSD. They have shame, self-blame, and low self-esteem. Now, apart from this psychological trauma, there is also an impact on their education. Children who go through child abuse are likely to drop out of school. Their academic performance is likely to go down, because imagine a child who has been traumatized, a child who is going through depression. That child would not have that sound mind to even perform well academically. They can also disengage from school. Now let's look at how child abuse affects the society as a whole. Childhood stolen means futures lost. Children may become disengaged, and even the cycle of violence may perpetuate. A child, apart from suffering from this physical harm, the psychological trauma, the educational impact, they also suffer from social stigmatization. They are likely to be called names by the society. And sometimes we drained state resources to be able to curb some of these issues, or to be able to treat some of these children who are sexually abused. Now, in every country, whether Africa and beyond Africa, there is the right of the child. Every country has the mandate to protect the right of the child. Now, when a child is sexually abused, that right of the child, as enshrined in conventions, are also violated. Now, in the context of Africa, where many children are already facing so many multiple vulnerabilities, from poverty to conflict to weak institutional support, child abuse magnifies those vulnerabilities. So now, what can each of us do? Because this is not a child protection agency problem. It is all of us. So for any parent or caregiver who is listening to me, talk with your children early, age appropriately, about their bodies, boundaries, safe adult, and safe and unsafe touches. To parent, you need to stay engaged. Know where your children are, who they are with, what environment they are in, including sport academies, clubs, online, everywhere. Parents need to stay engaged. Now, to parent again, you need to build trust so that your children can freely speak up when something makes them uncomfortable. Now, for schools, for sport academies, for community organizations, you need to ensure that child safeguarding policies are in place. Make sure you are screening adults. Make sure that there is clear reporting protocols and you are creating safe spaces for children. You also need to train teachers, train these coaches, train your staff on appropriate boundaries, train them on mandatory reporting, and train them on how they can recognize signs of abuse and encourage them to report. And if they report, make sure that you take the necessary actions to make sure that these perpetrators are well dealt with. Also, we need to create environments where children feel safe to disclose and where disclosures are taken seriously and acted upon. Now, for government and policymakers, we need to make sure that we are strengthening legislation around child abuse and exploitation. We need to ensure that minimum age of consent laws, criminal sanctions for perpetrators, protections for victims are in place. And they are not just in place, but those need to work. Because when you come to Ghana, when you go to any part of the world, there are a lot of laws that are enshrined in the constitutions, but sometimes the implementations are problematic. So to government and policymakers, we need to make sure that we are making these laws work and perpetrators are well dealt with. And we also need to make sure that we are investing in child protection systems. The social services, the counseling, the legal aid, victim support. We need to make sure that we are intentionally putting in resources, financial support to ensure that children are well protected. We also need to ensure that data collection, monitoring, and there is transparency in everything that we do. Another recommendation to our government and policymakers is that we need to make tackling online exploitation a priority. Cyberbullying is one of the ways that these pedophilias uses to sexually harass some of these children. Now we know that the internet is made available to everybody. So how are we ensuring that these children who have access to internet, who have access to social media, to gaming, are being protected from exploitation? Another thing too is that we need to be very vigilant. If you see something is off in a child's behavior, if you sense there is anything that is off in a child's behavior, please report it. You don't need to normalize grooming, hash money. Another thing that we also need to make sure that we need to challenge this cultural norm of silencing victims, especially boys. Usually we say that boys don't get abused, but boys get abused. The data that we recited earlier shows that in Africa, 4% to 60% boys experiences child abuse. So let us stop this culture of silencing boys. Let us make sure that we are creating the environment, the spaces for these boys to freely come up when they experience child abuse. We also need to support survivors. We need to ensure that any child who goes through sexual abuse gets access to psychosocial and educational support. And we also need to make sure that we do not blame them for them to experience further trauma. I can assure you that when we all play our parts, we make childhood safer. So as I wrap up, child abuse and pedophilia are not distant. They are within us. They are real. They are happening in our communities, in our schools, in our sports, in our clubs, in our homes. The statistics tell us the magnitude. The stories tell us the urgency. So to every listener, if you are a parent, a caregiver, educator, community leader, policymaker, this is your call. Please ask the hard questions. Be that safe adult. Protect the vulnerable. Strengthen the system. If you are a young person listening, your body is yours. You deserve to be safe. So speak up if something feels wrong. Know that you are not alone. You have a village of support around you. You have your community, you have leaders, you have policymakers. If your parents do not want to listen to you, there are other avenues that you can share your grievances. Talk to your community leader. Talk to the police. Talk to the law enforcement agency. Remember, you are not alone. Now, thank you for tuning in to today's episode. I hope this episode helps you to see the issue more clearly. It helps you and motivates you to act. Once again, I am Joyce Arthur. As we close today, I want to say this. The true measure of any society is how it protects its most vulnerable. Childhood should be seen as a season of joy and discovery, not trauma and fear. Every child deserves safety. Every child deserves a voice. And every child deserves a future free from abuse. Let us be loud. Let us be unshakable. Let us fight for every child who cannot fight for themselves. Thank you for joining today's episode of the Bold Conversations with Joyce podcast. If this touched you, share it, speak about it, teach it, stand against it. Because when we protect children, we protect the future. I am Joyce Arthur. Until next time, stay bold, stay compassionate, and keep fighting for change. Bye.